Welcome back. It is Wednesday, October the 30th, 2019. I am Devin Miller. That is Miguel Iterati, and this is a CRP News Roundup. We are going to be recapping what we just saw this past weekend in the world of mixed martial arts, and we're also going to be previewing the big event this Saturday in Madison Square Garden, UFC 244, headlined by the BMF title bout between the one and only Nate Diaz and the perfect counterpart, Jorge Gamebred Masvidal. But we're going to start out by recapping this past weekend that we saw a big win in a big grappler versus grappler bout with Maia pulling off a third-round submission over highly decorated wrestler, former Bellator Welterweight champion, former ONE FC champion, vs.Askren, and really solidifying himself maybe as the greatest grappler we've ever seen in the sport. And in lieu of this event, and now in the post fight talk of what's going on, Ariel Helwani did a good job this weekend on Monday when he gets to be the man that interviews Askren coming off his second loss in a row. He asked him the tough questions, and Askren is now affirmatively saying that he is considering retirement. So you got Maia pulling off a big win. Really, just like I said, I really think solidifying himself as one of the great grapplers in the history of the sport. And you've got Askren coming right out saying, this is a hard loss for me. This is coming off a 5-second flying knee knockout to Masvidal, and I'm considering hanging up the gloves. What's your thoughts in this fight, in the post fight? What's your post fight thoughts on this, Miguel?
Well, as we've covered here for a long time, I've been kind of calling for this fight since before the UFC had kind of put it together, and I was happy when they did. And I think, definitely Maia finishing him was one of the ways that I thought made the fight intriguing. That if it went that way, it would be a very intriguing tell over what we're getting with Ben Askren. The fact is Askren, his game is so, it's like 80% mind game, and I don't mean just talking and the trash talk and all that stuff, which he's very good at as well. I'm talking about just the pressures that he puts on you, by being in your face in a fight and stuff like that. But he's a very, very mental athlete, and it held back some of the shortcomings he has on the athletic side. And because he's a Olympic level wrestler, or, an NCAA champion and all that stuff, it's hard to say, he's not a great athlete. But he's older now, and some of this shine starts to come off of stuff. And he looked a little slow. He didn't really look like he was adapting well to the stand-up game and things like that. He was just he knew he had to rely on his grappling stuff, and there he thought he would be able to hang with anyone in the world. And now this tells him there is a guy better, and that's I see this as much more of a crushing blow to him than the Masvidal loss.
Yeah, because the Masvidal fight could kind of be chalked up to being a fluke. I mean, he didn't even really get a chance to get going in that fight. And a lot of people had Askren favored. If I'm correct, I believe he came into that fight favored on the books to beat Masvidal. And he was even looking at a potential title fight if he were to win that fight because, he was an undefeated prospect. He was highly touted for years as one of the best fighters outside of the UFC. He did everything he could to antagonize the UFC president for several years. He wanted his shot. He gets in there. Dana didn't even want to take a chance on him for years. And, we've known for a long time that he really is kind of a stylist in this game, a throwback to generations past where he had style versus style. But it's kind of showing that at the top levels of the UFC, it's not really working. He does still look slow. His stand-up game really hasn't evolved. He's not transitioning that well even with his wrestling. And he is a great grappler. No doubt about it. But right now, it's hard not to look at his UFC tenure right now as kind of like 3 strikes you're out type of thing because the Robbie Lawler fight, yeah, he got in there and got the win, but he was battered bad. And that was the big takeaway, especially from the casual fan, is that he was just getting battered bad. And then it was a very controversial finish that is still being protested to this day that Robbie Lawler did not tap. And, yeah, his arm felt kind of, lifeless, but yet he was still in there. He goes in there and just gets train wrecked after talking a lot of smack by Masvidal. And then he goes in and loses at his own game against Damian Maia. So, it's hard to see somebody that has been so bold in their arrogance fall from grace so fast. But, he exalted himself and he's been humbled. And, it's and even he's admitting that. I think he does seem like a very smart man. I think that there's other avenues that he could go into. I think he's got net worth in the millions, and he's done a lot. He was a highly decorated wrestler. He's been a highly decorated MMA fighter. He seems to have his own little studio set up every time he does an interview. Maybe he'll go into podcasting.
Yeah, I think I'd recommend hanging it up. He really doesn't have much more to prove, he could come back, go out on a win, and do a couple of things like that if he really wanted to, I think a slight drop-off in the level of competition that he's going to be facing, and he'd be winning again, because he's, he's a tough, there's no doubt about it. He's weathered, and he's tough, and he's still, a one-percenter in terms of top tough guys in the world, right? But here, in terms of Maia is a guy, that his application of jiu-jitsu, I wonder when the last time Maia actually put a gi on was. You know what I mean? Because he's been just dedicated to MMA-style jiu-jitsu. Okay, this is a position you get into. I'm up against the fence, and he's got my one leg, and I'm here. And he'll sit for hours in there working on things like that. I know Damian Maia, the way he works in the gym, and that's his advantage. And his application to MMA is much stronger than what still looks like a wrestler to me, in his, everything, in his footwork and everything. He's still, he's still relying on another sport, whereas Maia's more of a complete adaptation at this point. Even, Maia's stand-up, and it's funny, it's like, Maia at times, has learned the plum, and he'll throw knees and stuff, and he looks okay, Here, it's like Askren was so bad that it was like Maia's stand-up went out the window too, and it was just horrible, It's like, I don't know what happened there, but, they got to the ground too. That's the other thing that, we can close on this, because just thank God they got it to the ground, and it wasn't the kind of thing where they tried to slug it out, because that would have been just tragic.
Well, I'm glad that you segued to Damian Maia, because before we switch to talking about the other big performance of the weekend, we do have to throw some credit toward Damian Maia, because to me, Damian Maia is a Hall of Famer in the UFC. He's the second winningest fighter in the UFC's history, behind Donald Cerrone. This was his 21st victory inside the octagon, and he's kind of assumed that gatekeeper role. He had that at middleweight, now he has it at welterweight. But, man, when you look back at his past few years at welterweight, yeah, he got beat by some guys, but those guys were Tyron Woodley in a title fight by decision, Kamaru Usman, and Colby Covington. He's lost to the legit of the legit. So, he deserves a lot of credit. He's as elite as they come. And I do believe that he is the best grappler that we've ever seen inside, especially in modern mixed martial arts.
Yeah, Nobody take my hats off to him. Yep.
No one wants to hit the ground with that guy.
And, I definitely take my hats off to him. Longevity goes a long way, Interesting that him and Cerrone now, they've carved a niche for themselves as guys that, they didn't quite make the title picture. They're not going to have a UFC title on their resume. Mm-hmm. And, do you hold that against them? And you're probably right that, the line could start beneath those two guys as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, I'm not going to rank either one of those guys as like one of the top 2 or 3 best in their division's history or nothing. But to me, they're both Hall of Famers due to consistency and longevity. But moving on from here, though, one guy that Askren does have a win over, he was a baby at the time, has really blossomed into a fantastic fighter. And speaking of this welterweight division, I think Bellator has one of the best welterweights in the world. Douglas Lima goes in and wins the rematch this past weekend over Rory MacDonald in a 5-by-5 decision. This was a good fight. Here we got images of 50 Cent showering Douglas Lima with champagne, holding belts, and just got awarded $1 million by Bellator. And, I've got to be happy for a guy who's really paid his dues like Douglas Lima. And he's really somebody who's, fought back from some tough losses. He lost to Askren. He lost to Koreshkov in their first fight. But then he comes back and he wins the second and third fight with Koreshkov. And now he comes back, and he also lost the first Rory MacDonald fight, but now he's won this rematch. He'll probably never get a chance to fight Askren again. But he's making right. He's showing that there's an evolution in his game. And now he's the Bellator champion, and he wins the Welterweight Grand Prix. I believe there will be a third fight if Rory MacDonald is up to continuing to do this with his career. This was a close fight. I mean, it wasn't like he just got completely demolished in this fight by any means. I did have this fight definitely for Douglas Lima. But what's your thoughts on Douglas Lima going forward from here? Bellator's got, when it comes to him, Kyoji Horiguchi, Pitbull Ferrara, Rafael Lovato. I mean, they've got some solid champions right now. And then they got over there in the women, they got Julia Buds getting ready to fight Cyborg. They've got Alima Lay McFarland. Bellator's got some champions, man. And I've been saying it forever. When they get some champions, that's going to be good for them as an organization. What's your thoughts?
My hat's off to Douglas Lima. I thought it was a good performance. McDonald's always going to be one of those guys, I guess, that the potential that from the first time you saw him just never quite, panned out, so to speak. And there could be a bunch of reasons why that is. He's talented and stuff, but especially in the last couple of years where he actually, publicly questioned his will to continue and stuff like that. With all that stuff, that really put his, he didn't seem like once in a fight, obviously he gave his all in fights, and he left it in the ring and stuff like that. So it's not that, but, he seemed to lack emotion. I'm not sure exactly how to quantify, the fact that he never seemed psyched up, he never seemed like to be pumped up for stuff. And, I think that it's only gotten worse. So I'm we'll see where he goes from there. And Douglas Lima, how do we work Douglas Lima into, at this point, it's never going to happen or just not in the current circumstances. But I'd be all right with, if they're looking for a fight for Usman or something like that or something falls through, do a champion versus champion match and give Bellator, their dues for building up one guy and give the guy a decent position, because with what the UFC would do with Lima right now is, they'll bring him in at 170 and they'll put him in against, whichever monster that, is out there without a fight. Maybe he'll go 0-1. And unless he has, he's like an Eddie Alvarez type that, starts to win anyway, that murderer's row will eat through him, and he will not last against that murderer's row if the UFC does what they want. It would be cool to see them do a champion versus champion fight. We're just nowhere near that in the political end.
I agree with you, and I was getting ready to say that. I think that is a little premature, but not in this scenario that I'm about to lay out. They run it back for a third trilogy fight with MacDonald. He goes in there, he wins that. Then they run it back with Michael Venom Page after Venom Page, after he already knocked out Venom Page, he comes back, wins a couple fights. They rematch him with Venom Page. He wins that. He might get in there with Lorenz Larkin again or something and wins that again. Or Paul Daly or some of these guys. Or maybe there's a new they do some kind of super fight with Michael Chandler moves up or something. If he goes on a 4 or 5 fights title streak where he's defending his belt, he's looking good, there's a lot of attention on his name, that is where I could see a potential big crossover fight. I always go back to the days of when Gil Melendez and Nick Diaz were dominating in Strikeforce. And Josh Thompson was real big and down there at lightweight fighting with Melendez and stuff. There was real arguments among the MMA fan base about who the best welterweights and lightweights were. People wanted to see Diaz and St. Pierre. Of course, it ended up happening in the UFC when Diaz moved over and Strikeforce folded. But take back look back at that time. If Strikeforce wouldn't have folded, it would have been competitive, would have got more ratings, would have been going up and with their business and not caving in. And Nick Diaz would have went on to not only be on a 17, 18 fight win streak, but would have went on to be 20, 22, 23 fight win streak, kept winning, kept being this enigmatic personality, and George St. Pierre was still dominating. Would there have been money enough in the UFC to take that gamble? To say, we think we do got the best welterweight, and we'll take that gamble, and make it something like the Mayweather-Conor fight, where they're willing to do this crossover because there's so much money to be won on both sides that they can't pass on it. I'm not sure Douglas Lima is going to be that crossover star, but if Bellator gets somebody that's, if this would have been Michael Venom Page, who would have beat Douglas Lima in their last fight, and he just went in there and beat Rory MacDonald, and Michael Venom Page was an undefeated personality who was dominating over there, I could see people wanting to see him fight Usman big time. And
yeah, you took the words right out of my mouth. Page is the more marketable guy. The bottom line is this: there's two things that you're talking about here. The UFC, in the traditional sense, they would never have done it before, and I don't think that they're in a situation where they will do it again. Not in the true sense that we're talking about, which would be, Bellator versus UFC, and stock it up at that. What they would do is they would probably, do the under the carpet or behind the scenes, hey Doug, why don't you do me a favor, Dougie? Fax me over your contract. I just want to take a look at it. You know what I mean? And then once they know, okay, he's got the belt, okay, finish your contract out. You got a year. We'll take care of you, or whatever it takes. And they'll approach it that way. And I think that's traditionally what they've done with other guys. When guys become free agents, then it's where the UFC, it goes well for them with other guys and stuff like that when the UFC's not that interested. But if they were really interested and wanted to bring over the best guy, a guy who, when they bought over Alvarez, right? They went out and got Askren, which, at the end of the day was still a feather in their cap to bring over the guy. So, but in no way, shape, or form, one maybe got the best benefit out of them and they got some talent back. But I don't think that that's going to lead to a, like I said, UFC versus Bellator. Here's Dana talking about his guy, and then over here, the same production team's going to Coker, and Coker's talking about Douglas Lee. That ain't going to happen. We're not in that world.
Yeah, it's going to be Bellator getting their hands on somebody that just transcends the sport, like a McGregor, somebody whose personality is bigger than the promotion itself. That's going to be able to make that happen.
His way, hopefully you need a guy who's going to talk his way into it and leave Dana a little choice.
Yeah,
Dana's a master on the microphone himself too, so he can spin anything. You got to make him like it. Like McGregor, sort of willed the Mayweather fight into being there. Yeah, maybe someone like Venom Page with personality and stuff like that could turn it around the next couple of years. And make him really want it. I see Dana heading more towards boxing and grabbing guys like Anthony Joshua and a different level of marketability. Lima's just unfortunately, Lima's a hard hat. He's a worker. He's not a breakover star. Not in the UFC's playbook.
I agree with you, unfortunately. But moving on from here, we've got some big news coming out that came out kind of unexpectedly here. But Paulo Costa apparently is sidelined right now, and he's going to be injured. And Dana White obviously shut down the idea of a John Jones super fight right now because, Adesanya just won the belt and all. But it's already been, coming out on Twitter. Romero's saying, see you, I'm going to see you soon, boy. Adesanya's like, what, you guys are just now hearing about this? We've been making these plans. I'm going to see you soon. It's looking all like that this is going to happen. I don't think that this was the UFC's plan. I don't think this was Israel Adesanya and his team's plan. But they're really kind of left with no choice unless they want to leapfrog Yoel and go to Cannonier, which I don't think that fight sells as much right now, and I don't think it's as big of a test. And Yoel Romero supposedly is in his 40s, so this looks like this is going to happen. I will say this on record right now as somebody who has been on the Adesanya train, has made the hype. If this fight happens, this is his big test. This is the style that could cause him a lot of problems. You're dealing with a guy who has literally no neck. This guy, he had his hands down and was taking direct shots from Paulo Costa against the cage, never flinching. We've seen guys never return the same after they fought him, notably Chris Weidman, Luke Rockhold, Leona Machida even to an extent, and definitely to this point Robert Whittaker, who made it very well known that fighting that man was like kick and steal, and he's never felt a human that felt that way. Yoel Romero changes people's career, and I have no doubt that Israel Adesanya is a much, much more prolific and decorated striker and will have the advantage in that department. But it's not a kickboxing bout. This is going to be an MMA fight, and he's dealing with a physical specimen that he has not been in there with yet. This is an interesting matchup, and I think it's a huge test for Adesanya and his legacy and where he's at on the pound-for-pound record. Definitely a big test if he wants to leapfrog into a super fight with John Jones. If this fight happens, we're in for an interesting lead up to it, because this is one of those, and I think you'll agree with me, Miguel. You look at it, you go into the lead up, you're like, I don't know what to expect with this one. I don't know, maybe Izzy's really that good. Maybe he goes in there and really just shuts the lights out and puts on a very impressive performance. On the other hand, it's Yoel Romero, who I think won the second fight with Robert Whittaker and has just been a wrecking ball to so many people. I think he would have won the Costa fight had that been 5 rounds. What's your thoughts on all this, Miguel?
Yeah, I think it's unexpected. I didn't think, if you're looking for an opponent for Adesanya because, the next guy, Costa or whoever, is not ready or whatever, Romero's not the guy I expected him to turn to. Now, Romero's resume and stuff, obviously, Romero's guys are on the horn pushing for him and stuff, and that makes sense as well. But he's not the guy I would have chosen. At the same time, it does constitute a word you use, which is a test. And Adesanya, if anything, right now the test that remains to him is to see some adversity in a fight. You can pretty much, hope that maybe on the ground. It's funny, Romero is just like you said. He's just a house, right? So you never kind of know what he's going to do, and he could come out and try the stand-up world first and stuff, and you wonder what would happen, if he came out looking for, an ankle and a wrist right away and just get him to the ground no matter what. And the bottom line is, Adesanya touts 100 kickboxing matches as well. Now you're talking about a guy with, a couple thousand wrestling matches, and that stuff starts to balance itself out in terms of experience and stuff. So, this is the biggest possible test in the middleweight division that I could see. And, unexpected too, because with Jacare might be the second biggest, right? But we expected the UFC, or at least I did, I expected the UFC to sort of turn the corner here from the older guys. You mentioned Romero. You don't lie about being in your 40s, so unless he's 50, he's in his 40s, you know what I mean? So I thought they'd move away from the older guys and sort of issue in some of the newer guys like Costa and things like that. But, Romero's going to get one more shot. We'll see. We'll see how it goes. We'll see if everybody gets to the fight.
The only thing I would disagree with what you just said, and I think I know what you were implying and meaning, but I do believe that Adesanya has faced some adversity. I mean, he had a hell of a fight with Kelvin Gastelum. Kelvin Gastelum, who I really think is so much better. We're going to talk about him a little bit later in this podcast than what people are really giving him credit for. And I think that he came away, and I mentioned that in my post fight with the Whittaker Adesanya fight, that he comes away looking great because Whittaker just gets steamrolled. Gastelum went 5 hard rounds. But I think I know what you're saying. It's more of we have not seen Adesanya in a position where he's clearly losing something. He's clearly behind in the fight. Something like Conor having to fight back with the Chad Mendes fight, where he's consistently getting taken down. He fights through it, gets him out of there. Or we haven't seen him in there with somebody like a Khabib, who's really neutralizing his whole game and implementing a different style on him. this fight, the number one thing that stands out for me that's going to be a big test with Adesanya is Kelvin Gastelum's got amazing striking. Robert Whittaker's a great fighter. Anderson Silva, obviously. But those are tacticians. Those are technical fighters. You're dealing with a superhuman athlete in Yoel Romero, and that's going to be a power versus finesse type of fight that I think is going to be very interesting when it happens. Other big news, and we won't spend too much time on this, but it's worth covering. This is going back to just talking about what we were talking about with the welterweight division. It looks like Tyron Woodley is going to be taking on Leon Edwards. And January 18th, this will probably be the co-main event of a Conor McGregor main event. It's on, there's been rumors about, we're not even going to talk about Conor McGregor today, but there's been rumors of Justin Gaethje, Donald Cerrone. Dana's pretty much shot down the whole Frankie Edgar idea. I think what the UFC is looking at is hoping and praying that Diaz pulls through this weekend and Conor gets in there with either Gaethje or Cerrone and picks up a win. And I think they're going to run the BMF belt back next summer for the trilogy fight with Diaz and Conor. That's a side road. I think that's what they're hoping happens. But welterweight division, Douglas Lima goes in, pulls off a big win this weekend over in Bellator and becomes the Bellator welterweight champion. Damian Maia defeats vs.Askren, and we know that Covington and Usman are coming up. This is probably the number, and then obviously this weekend we've got Diaz and Masvidal. So lots of welterweight talk all around the world of mixed martial arts right now. Here we got the former champion against probably the guy that most people are avoiding the most in this division right now. Masvidal will walk up and steal on him and say he gave him the 3-piece in the soda, never mention his name again. Nobody wants to fight Leon Edwards, who's won 9 out of his last 10, his lone loss, a decision loss to current champion Kamaru Usman. If ESPN or somebody paid me to write my top 10 welterweight rankings right now in the world of mixed martial arts, I would have Usman number 1 with Leon number 2, followed by Colby, Woodley, and Masvidal. And Leon's maybe the most unknown out of them. This is a big opportunity for him to get some more attention, especially if Conor McGregor's the main event. And it'll be a big opportunity for him, number 1, with the name that he's facing, and number 2, on the potential card that he's facing. What's your thoughts on this between Woodley and Edwards? You got Woodley coming in, still ranked as the number 1 contender in this division, even ahead of Colby, underneath Usman. You got Leon coming in ranked number 4 behind Woodley, Covington, and Masvidal as the contenders. He's the number 4 ranked contender in this division. What's your thoughts on this fight?
Wake up the Tyron Woodley fans. He's getting his fight in. Now, the problem with this fight is it's in January, so if he fights in January, we might not see him again now till 2021.
Yeah.
And that's, really the essence of the problem. Am I mistaken? Has Woodley not fought since he lost the belt?
He hasn't. And he got dominated 5. He lost all 5 of those rounds against
and prior to that, he wasn't exactly the most active guy or the most active champion or anything like that, earning criticism from, fellow fighters and Dana and everything like that. This guy, if he's not injured and he's overthinking fights or, not grumbling about the paycheck or whatever, you got to get all that stuff behind you. You never build momentum this way.
Are you trying to say, Miguel, that he can't knock out Canelo Alvarez?
Is that some of the talk that he's been engaging in out there on the internet?
Yeah, he's been throwing. I thought, yeah. It doesn't surprise me if you just scrolled right by that one. Yeah, he was coming out saying that he wants to box Canelo Alvarez.
It's like, the problem for me, honestly, and is that Woodley really is a number 1 contender who's off the radar. He doesn't fight enough, and it doesn't just come from the inactivity after losing the belt. It comes from a well-earned reputation before that. So in this type of situation now, he's literally put himself at a disadvantage, mentally. When you lose a fight like the last time, to me, come back. If you're not injured, come back quickly and get on the win column. Edwards is not a guy who's a joke who you can just, say, I'll get a win and I'll be right back on track and stuff. They're going to put you in a test. And now on top of that, you put a layoff of a year and stuff like that. And Edwards is hungry. Like you said, people are avoiding him. He's maybe getting to the point where he's feeling like, he's just due, hasn't been gotten there. You want to face a pissed off Edwards coming off a year plus layoff? Go ahead and do it. You know, Woodley really doesn't set himself up to be liked or for super success with that type of career path the last few years.
Yeah, and people are forgetting. I mean, I really think people are sleeping on just how good Leon Edwards is. He does have 2 losses in the UFC, one to Claudio Silva back in 2014 and one to Kamaru Usman back in December of 2015. But he's 28 years old, so he was about 24 and 25 years old when he fought those fights against one the guy that went on to become the UFC champion. Since then, he's won 8 fights in a row against names like Vicente Luque, Donald Cerrone, Gunnar Nelson, and Rafael dos Anjos in his last fight. He's a very good fighter, and he has been open saying, he's so mad about everything that went on with Masvidal, that over in Britain when Masvidal knocked out Till, and notoriously Masvidal goes up and throws a combination on him, gets broke up after the fight. And he's been saying, I want that fight, but they won't book it because Leon's really being slept on not only by just, the casual and hardcore fans, but also the MMA media. And, I agree with you. I think that this is going to be Leon's going to be very motivated to go in there and put on a serious performance, especially, I keep bringing it up, especially if Conor McGregor is the main event of this card, because there's going to be so much eyes on this event. And if they're the co-main event, this is such a platform for Leon Edwards to make a statement that, I deserve to fight for a belt. I deserve to be respected as one of the top 2 or 3 best fighters in probably the best division in the sport. There might not be a more underrated fighter in the sport right now than Leon Edwards. And I think that this is his coming out party if this fight happens and it's main evented by who we think it's going to be main evented by according to all the reports. So.
Yeah, everyone wants on that card. If McGregor's at the top of it, he'll get a lot of eyes on it and stuff like that. And it could be the kind of thing where he puts on a standout performance. Masvidal happens to win this next weekend, and now you may have, a London O2 Arena type of super fight for next year with Edwards hosting Masvidal or something like that. Let it stew. And, Masvidal's got to take the next step. If Masvidal wants the paydays to keep coming, he's got to win this weekend anyway, right? So we'll see. Each step there. But, Woodley to me, he's pushed himself into being an afterthought. With a win here, he'll make himself more than that. But, again, with a win there, I want to, this is slated for January, I want to see him by May, June, fight. This is tiring, if we got to write you off until – February of next year because you're sitting around waiting to be on the Super Bowl card against somebody. Get out of here. Go fight. I
agree. Moving on now to what's going to take up the bulk of this podcast. UFC 244 this Saturday, Madison Square Garden, headlined by the much-anticipated BMF belt title fight, I guess, is what they're calling it. It's really a, throwback to like WWE, like kind of a fusion of the WWE with the NWO belts and all this kind of stuff back in the WCW days. You got Masvidal coming off his 2 biggest performances of his career, really a blood and guts fighter who paid his dues, fought his way up the ranks, has been somebody who has been highly up and down in his career, but always one of those guys that was you just get an essence of being an underachiever. But he's always had such a great personality and such an entertaining style. Well, now he's finally getting his due. He goes into London, knocks out the hometown boy and Darren Till, lays him out cold, then gets put on the International Fight Week card against vs.Askren, undefeated, former one championship and Bellator champion, knocks him out with the fastest knockout in UFC history with a flying knee in 5 seconds. And he's going against the guy who was, for the longest time, considered probably the perfect B-side for a legitimate A-side in Conor McGregor. He was that complimentary opponent to sell a big pay-per-view for the big superstar. But now you got Nate Diaz coming into this as the superstar. I mean, I've seen reports yesterday that I posted, love him or like him or hate him, whatever. Donald Trump is planning on being in attendance to this. And I laughed when I saw that. I'm like, he sends his boys for Colby Covington, who's constantly talking about him, but he wants to be in attendance here. You know, he wants to be there for Nate Diaz. Nate Diaz is somebody that just talk around the water cooler, just talk around people I know, looking at comments on Facebook. He is one of the most universally respected, appreciated athletes in the sport right now. He is, this Saturday, he's one fight away from becoming a legitimate megastar in this sport. And I think it sets him up for even bigger fights potentially in the future. I really think they're wanting to make that trilogy fight with Conor. But Masvidal is kind of the same thing. He's got a huge platform here at Madison Square Garden. This fight's going to be seen by millions of people. To make himself be a breakthrough, huge superstar. Both these guys are at they have a real opportunity this weekend. I think they know it. They're going to make a lot of money, more money than they've ever made before. They have a bigger platform that they're carrying on their own than they've never had before. Their personalities are two personalities that people love. And, you know, it's hard for people to even pick who they want to win this fight. This is a big one. And I think their styles match perfectly for this to be a legitimate, just barn burner of a bang fest. And how can this not get your blood moving, Miguel? What's your thoughts on this? You got Rory Masvidal taking on Nate Diaz this Saturday, main eventing Madison Square Garden, BMF title. What's your thoughts, Miguel?
You know, I'm going to be watching this Saturday, and even when I know the guys in the fights, I usually, have a way. I've seen so many fights. I have a way of thinking of fights that, I could see most, especially in a close fight like this where, it could go either way. There's about 3 or 4 different scenarios that could happen that are logical. That if any of those pop up, all right, it went Nick's way, it went George's way, And usually I take the fights that way, like kind of like, all right, it went that, like, and I'm wrong a lot of the times. Like I've been wrong a lot. In the build up to the Maia fight, we picked Maia right, but prior to that, I've been on a good streak of just picking the wrong guy, And you can always see the fight going both ways and stuff like that. But George is one of those guys that I'm sort of like leaving the Vulcan calculating mind aside, and I'm going to go with emotion. And I really like to see George, break through and win. He's become a social media star already, so he's got a lot of stuff going out on YouTube, and people are taping him and stuff like that. And among all the noise out there, he talked. I don't know if you saw the video where he talked about fighting Eve Edwards, and I made that fight. Yeah. That was on my card. I remember doing that to him, and it was the right time for him, and he won the fight. He actually he rocked Eve, and I remember Eve coming to me afterwards and being like, "I don't think I've ever lost on one of your cards before." So yeah, it was definitely a moment, a seminal fight. But the fact that he looks back at it so long tells me that I was right about him. That he may have been young, and he may have been the kid that fights in backyards with Kimbo and stuff like that, but there's a very serious side to him that looked at this. You saw it in the way he discredited Askren. He was like, Askren's a bum, He's like, Askren hasn't been doing what I've been doing for 20 years, you know what I mean? He knows, he's confident in that way, and, I'd like to see that carry over. He's always around good people, even when, before he was with ATT, when he was coming up in Florida, he was with David and Marco Avalon, and those guys are no joke. Ask around in the grappling world. Marco's more of a teacher. David's the one who competed, but they had their moments. Now they're older competitors, I would say, but he was always with real people. Marcelo Tigre, the kickboxing coach he was with during the Bodog times, the guy who cornered him for the Eve Edwards fight. Another just this very serious competitor. So he never, there was always a cerebral side where, when we were in Russia for one of the fights, I forget who George fought over there, but maybe Koltar Gill. I don't remember who he fought. But in the after-fight part, it was like, hey, somebody's fighting, Russians, like, locals, not people with the show. Someone got in the fight. Hey, it was George, So yeah, he's always very real and stuff like that. But at the same time, don't discount somebody who's been in the game at the serious. He always took it seriously, and that does mirror a lot of what I know about Nick Diaz. I don't know them that well, but I did get to book in those eras. I booked Jake Shields, who came from their group through Cesar Gracie and stuff like that. And the loyalty of those guys, even still to this day, because back then it was a long time loyalty. In 2007, they'd been with Cesar since they were kids and stuff like that. They still consider him their master and stuff like that. That's rare nowadays. Masvidal more hopped around and stuff like that. I don't know. They're both very unique and different personalities. But what I can tell you is everything I said about them tells me they're lifers. They're lifers in this game since they were kids. There are videos of Nate fighting in a gym, Nick, George fighting in backyards, little skinny boy, with little boys, They're like, you're a little guy. Like, he's 9. It's like they're not 9, but they might as well be, man. They're like they're kids, They're lifers in this sport, and it all comes down to this weekend, And I'm an East Coast guy. I got to go with George.
I'm glad you brought that up, Miguel, because when you were talking about Masvidal's upbringing, it was almost like if you just switch the name and locations and organizations, you can almost apply the exact same story to Nate Diaz.
Yep.
These are two guys, before the Conor McGregor bout, that just fell by providence in the hands of Nate Diaz. That was scheduled to be RDA. RDA pulls out and leaves Conor without an opponent with 10 days. And they're not going to cancel a Conor McGregor event. Nate Diaz, perfect person, perfect spot. And those 10 days were probably the best hype ever before a fight. It was so perfect. It was going to make Conor McGregor a superstar. Them getting on the money. All the different back and forth, the touch button, the park lines, he makes gun signs with his hands while making animal puppets with the other. Talking about, he's a thug in the street but teaches kids jiu-jitsu on Sunday mornings and stuff. Like, it made Conor McGregor a star and Nate Diaz, and then Nate Diaz goes in and pulls it off. And before that fight, he was making like 30 and 30. He was making he wasn't even making – he could have walked away with only $30,000 if he would have lost that fight with Michael Johnson. Then when you look at Jorge Masvidal, he was brought in just earlier this year, to be the comeback fight for the UFC's golden boy in England, bringing him into his hometown. He comes off a title loss that they rushed him into. They're like, oh, well, we'll put him in there with Masvidal. Perfect style. He's taller, he's longer, he'll outbox him. He gets laid the hell out by Jorge Masvidal in London. After he gravitated, as you mentioned, this social media presence before that fight. Talking just, laid back, looking like, Scarface everywhere he goes. Just, cool as the other side of the pillow everywhere he goes in every interview. Got a lot of people looking at him like, man, I really like Masvidal. And then goes in there and shuts Still's lights out. Then does what he does to Askren. If he goes in there and gets a big win in this platform, in this stage against Nate Diaz, especially finish, he goes from being a journeyman who was on a 2-fight losing streak, who was always a great fighter, as I mentioned, but somebody that just kept falling short, who was being brought in there to prop up other big fighters, to potentially really being neck and neck with Israel Adesanya for the fighter of the year. I don't know who will get it. If he finishes Nate Diaz this year, it could be either one of them. Right now, it seems like it would be Adesanya by a landslide, but not really. When you look at what Masvidal's done this year, if Masvidal goes in there and gets a big win this weekend over Nate Diaz, which I think he's favored to do, I'm not sure how the books are looking at it. I think it's a tough fight for Nate Diaz. I keep saying that I think this fight's going to look a lot like Conor, too. I think it's going to look a lot like Conor. I think Nate's going to take a lot of damage, and it's going to be whether Nate can weather the storm and push forward and start picking up the tempo mid-fight while Masvidal slows down, which just plays for just an amazing fight for the fans, and that's how I think the fight's going to play out. But Masvidal could end up walking away as the sports fighter of the year in 2019. And who would have predicted that a couple of years ago? Who would have predicted where he was at? He just beat Donald Cerrone a couple of years ago. He's been silently consistent, even with his up and downs. And here he is at the best moment of his career. Same can be said about Nate Diaz. These two have grinded their way into where they're at. And I'm not sure there's, for any just hardcore fan to the sport that just love fighters that, fight through all the obstacles, stay in the game. Why have I said forever that Donald Cerrone is so loved, even though he has a lot of losses? Just because he keeps fighting. And these are two guys that model that same style also. And, they bring it every time. And the winner this weekend, I'm sticking to it. You're going to have like a handful. You're going to have Conor McGregor. You're going to have Israel Adesanya. You're going to have the winner this weekend. And I guess you can throw in John Jones. Those are the cream of the crop of massive superstars that the sport has right now. The winner of this weekend doesn't even have to have a belt. They can make their own belt. And they will be able to headline whatever pay-per-view against whatever opponent they want. I guarantee it. Whoever wins this weekend. So this is a huge fight for them.
Yep. No, let's just see how it plays out, but because hold on one second here.
Well, I want to ask you real quick, what is your thoughts about I don't like that Canelo and Kovalev is on the same night. They've had this booked. This was Canelo's promoter. This was De La Hoya. This was their making. And
it's interesting you bring that up because De La Hoya, he dabbled in MMA. He was the promoter for the debacle that was Tito Ortiz, Chuck Liddell 3. Dana is on record as calling him an idiot. And you're talking about a couple of guys worth, I don't know, couple $100 million each. So it's like they don't like each other. So yeah, I think this smacks of ego. And I think that, Canelo's used to having a privileged spot in boxing. They figured maybe they're not in Vegas, so they're not going to run into some competition. But I think they may have made a mistake here. And I think the UFC is coming up with this fight, even if it's a non-title fight and stuff. This is the most appealing fight of the weekend. Kovalev and Canelo, is going to play second fiddle. I could be wrong on that because boxing is a way of, showing up for the big fights in Vegas and the whole thing. But I think Canelo felt pressure to, fight in November and they picked the date, check the Vegas venues. UFC's not in town. They didn't expect, I think, that the UFC was going to eventually answer with the biggest fight of the year, for competition for him and stuff. So definitely that business end is something, worthy of another podcast and something I'm going to be keeping a close eye on to see which of the two companies does better.
Well, I know this in the Midwest. I can't really speak for the coast because I know on the West and in the East Coast where there's more congregated people than anywhere in the United States, obviously. Boxing is probably still supreme. I think it's shrinking with their margin. But here in the Midwest, I don't know anybody that's more excited for Canelo this weekend, even as the biggest star in boxing over the BMF title bout between Masvidal and Diaz. I do agree with you. I think that people are going to be surprised at the margin that is Masvidal Diaz, even with the pay-per-view price tagged onto it. I mentioned him earlier, but I mentioned both these guys earlier. Co-main event of the night, you got Kelvin Gastelum, who, we mentioned him talking about Israel Adesanya. He's coming back for his first fight since earlier this year when he lost a hard decision to Adesanya, and where he got Darren Till, who is making his first comeback after getting laid out earlier this year by Rory Masvidal. So here we are. We've just been talking about both these guys. They're matched up. Darren Till making his middleweight debut in this fight, coming off 2 losses at welterweight. He was a massive welterweight. I think he's somebody that will be a bigger middleweight than even Kelvin Gastelum is. I think he'll be better at middleweight. But what do you say about them throwing him in there against, one of the very, very best at middleweight right now, you've got Kelvin Gastelum ranked number 4. And he just gave a much better showing against Adesanya, the champion, than former champion Robert Whittaker did. They really have a lot until. They rushed him into a title fight with Woodley. They put that was one of those title fights where it was a lot like the Ngannou-Stipe bout where all the attention was on the challenger. They they never really liked Woodley in the first place, but they put all their eggs and they're going to have a new British talent in Darren Till. He was undefeated. He was going to be the champion. Goes in there, doesn't even land a punch against Woodley, gets submitted in the second round, then gets laid out in his hometown against Masvidal. They still haven't thrown in the towel on this guy. They're moving him up in weight, and they're going to go throw him in there with the top 5 talent against Kelvin Gastelum. I think that's going to turn out to be a mistake because I'm going to keep saying it, and I think I'll be validated again this weekend. And I think I was validated with it in the lead up to the Adesanya Robert Whittaker fight. I think people really sleep on how good Kelvin Gastelum is, and I think he proves it this weekend. What's your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree with you. He's a 2-1 favorite at the books. So that should tell you a lot. Till. What I don't like about Till in this fight is that I think Masvidal was his bounce back fight. And it didn't go his way, so now that adds to the weight of a loss. You know what I mean? Now it's 2 in a row, and now you're really questioning yourself. The move up in weight, Gastelum, probably not the right guy. I think you're right on there. I think the fact that Gastelum, it's weird because there's nothing about him, but just having seen the number of fights that I've had the opportunity to see, he kind of reminds me of a guy like Jeremy Horn, who's like just dangerous almost all the time in a fight. You don't know what he's going to be okay standing. He's going to be on his feet. He's going to be good on the ground. He's going to be tricky, and he's going to have a wild heart, like the kind of where you may get off a combo or something that you think is a finishing fight, and the guy's still in front of you kind of hard. You know what I mean? So I think Gastelum's, the very wrong opponent for a guy in his bounce back fight. If Gastelum's at the peak of his powers. The last fight, I think he's got an emotional dump after that, but I don't think it was the kind of fight that breaks you mentally. I think that he could take away a lot of good things from that fight. Mainly, I think he could still beat Adesanya, if he didn't decide to engage in a kickboxing fight with him the whole goddamn time. You know what I mean? He'd shake it up a little bit. I think you're in the neighborhood, kid, I think his coaches and everybody. So I think he's got less questions about himself than Till does heading into this fight.
I agree. Moving on, though, we got another. I guess the story of the night is welterweights. We covered Askren and Maia. We covered Lima and MacDonald. We talked a little bit about Woodley and Edwards being matched up. And then obviously the BMF belt match between Masvidal and Diaz is at welterweight. We got another big welterweight bout between maybe the dark horse of the entire division, Vicente Luque, taking on Wonderboy Thompson. Stephen Thompson, this is his first showing since getting knocked out earlier this year at the hands of Anthony Pettis in a shock upset that seen Pettis knock him out in the second round. You got Luque coming into this bout on a 6-fight win streak. When you look at the divisional rankings of this division right now, you got Vicente Luque coming in at an embarrassingly ranked number 14, which is so undervalued. He should be much higher. You got Stephen Thompson coming in ranked number 9 in the division. I am hoping that this is going to be the fight that finally Vicente finally breaks through. I think he's a very good fighter. Always brings it. I mean, there's never a dull moment with a Vicente Luque bout. He just had an amazing fight with Mike Perry. He seems like he's fighting like every other month, too. I mean, he's been so active. What's your thoughts on this fight? Wonderboy, I mean, he is the last guy. I mean, his last win was against Rory MacDonald. People forget that he did beat Masvidal, and but he is 1-3 in his last 4 fights. Got knocked out by Pettis, lost a close decision to Darren Till. Lost another close decision to Tyron Woodley. Had a draw before that. Before that, I mean, he beat Rory MacDonald. He beat Johnny Hendricks. I mean, he was looking like he was going to assume the throne as the champion. Really has never been able to assume that kind of prestige since the Woodley bouts and stuff. Now coming off a hard knockout and gets thrown in there with Vicente Luque. It looks like the UFC's kind of and on top of that, some very dull performances, especially in the Woodley title bouts, and even the Masvidal bout was, Woodley wasn't the most exciting. It was more of a tit for tat bout that Masvidal never got off on, and Thompson just picked him apart with points. Now they're throwing him in there with a guy like Luque. Seems to me like this is a fight where they just want Thompson to go down in the rankings. They want to move Luque up. I could be wrong. What's your thoughts on this one?
Well, if we fall back to my tried and true question, what's good for the sport at this point, I think it would be better if Luque broke through here and, as you said, earned his rightful spot in the rankings. I think he is undervalued right now. And the fact is, to me, Thompson's become stale. I mean, he's a stand-up fighter, and, he's added wrinkles and things like that and stuff. But now that we've seen, him fail a few things, he's going to fall back on his bread and butter and stuff. So I'm not sure that we're going to get a better version of him than we've seen in the past. Knockouts for stand-up fighters, they tend to take them hard, too. So we'll see what we get here. Hopefully Luque and his aggression are able to shine in this spot, because I think he's got more to show. I think with Woodley, with Wonderboy, we've already seen, his top performances.
Yeah, and I agree with you, and I wanted to look to make sure I was correct about Luque, because I feel like since I've been doing this podcast with you, Miguel, Luque's fought several times. This will be his fourth fight of the year. He fought February, May, and then Perry back in August. So very active. Wins this, he'll be on a 7-fight win streak. So this is a big opportunity for him. We got a heavyweight bout also on the main card of this fight night. We got Derek Lewis, the Black Beast, returning for the first time since his Madison Square Garden loss to Daniel Cormier last November. He'll be taking that's wrong. He lost to Junior Dos Santos. I remember that. So he's on a 2-fight losing streak to Daniel Cormier and Junior Dos Santos. He's going to be taking on Blagoy Ivanov, who, we've covered him a few times on here. He lost his UFC debut to Junior Dos Santos by 5-round decision in a main event of a fight night. Since then, he pulled off a controversial win over Ben Rothwell, though neither one of us thought he won. And then he did beat Tai Tuivasa. Now he gets put in there with the Black Beast. The rankings for this fight coming in here at heavyweight, we have Derek Lewis still ranked as the number 5 ranked contender, and you got Ivanov ranked as number 8. So this is a big opportunity, I think, for Ivanov to kind of really make himself out to be a legit contender at heavyweight. I'm not really sure what the upside is with Derek Lewis at this point, other than just being a popular personality. But his fights with Dos Santos and Cormier, I mean, it just really showed a completely different level of mixed martial arts talent in those bouts. He's got a lot of power. He was losing the Alexander Volkov fight very badly. I feel like he's just kind of a novelty right now. The Black Beast, my balls are hot. It's just more of a personality. He's not really a legitimate talent in the world of mixed martial arts. What's your thoughts on this one?
I don't know. There's a whole lot of that going around in the heavyweight division, it seems. Aside from the top guys, there's a big drop off. At this point, I think that we've seen enough of Ivanov to know that Ivanov is on the B side of the talent pool as well. I mean, he's a tough, sturdy guy. This should be a good fight. It's an interesting fight, and that's why I'm okay with it. They might want to do something like 1-round fights for the heavyweights, or or 3-minute rounds or something like that, but being what it is this fight will be decent where it's positioned on the card. I'm all right with it. Let the guys bang it out and stuff like that. I don't think either guy factors into the title picture, really.
I don't either. And, they're both ranked, but to me, when I look at that, Miguel, the first thing that comes to my mind is more proof of just how weak the heavyweight division is. That these two are top 10 ranked talents in this division.
Yep.
Moving on to a division that's not slacking, though, on talent. And this was a surprising fight. I don't know who's managing Kevin Lee, But we're going to talk about this. We got Kevin Lee returning back down to lightweight after a failed debut at welterweight against RDA. And he gets to meet Gregor Gillespie in his bout. Kevin Lee coming into this bout, Kevin Lee was somebody that was riding high for a long time. Went I think to be 9-1 in the UFC, 9-2 in the UFC before running into Tony Ferguson in an interim title fight. Loses that by a third-round triangle after a tough, struggling weight cut. Then he comes back and batters Edson Barbosa, but then he loses a second fight to Al Iaquinta and then loses his welterweight debut to Rafael dos Anjos. He's now 1-3. He was a very brash young talent, Motown phenom, had a lot of potential behind him, had a lot of hype, was on all the talk shows, bragging, saying that he's going to be the world champion. He's going to be the one to smash Khabib. He would smash Conor. And it just hasn't turned out that way. When we look at Gillespie, we got Gillespie coming in here, 32 years old. He is a highly, highly decorated wrestler and a highly touted prospect coming into this bout 5-0 in the UFC. They still do have Kevin Lee ranked in the lightweight division for some reason, but they have him ranked number 10. They have Gillespie coming in ranked at number 11. I think those rankings are probably appropriate if they're both going to be ranked. This is an interesting fight. When I look at this fight, Miguel, I'm seeing this is by far the biggest step up in competition for Gillespie at this point. There's people that are on the inside and on the underground that believe that Gillespie is the one that has the style to beat even Khabib, that he's such a good wrestler that he can even neutralize Khabib's wrestling. I think that's premature. There's been a lot of hype behind him. He is undefeated. He's looked pretty solid in every fight that he's been in. He seems to have a really good head on his shoulders when you hear him talk. He seems to be a real student of the game. Kevin Lee, though, made a big transition in his career. He left Extreme Couture in Vegas, and he went up to TriStar to train with George St. Pierre and Faraz Zahabi. He seems a lot more humble in his interviews. I won't ever forget after he lost to RDA, him going on Joe Rogan's podcast, doing a 2.5 hour long podcast, and he was saying, "I'm going to take this downskirt in my career as a man. I'm not gonna hide from the cameras. Let's talk about it." Joe Rogan's the one who encouraged him to, check out American Top Team, check out some of these other areas. Greg Jackson's and he's the one who personally recommended Montreal and Faraz Zahabi. That ended up where he's going to be. Kevin Lee's got a lot of talent. I mean, and he's such a personality that he could be a big star for the sport. The number one thing that concerns me about this is he's been somebody that's been stuck in that mucky middle between welterweight and lightweight for a long time. He's been the most vocal person coming out for a 165 division for a long time, which I'm so surprised. At the beginning of the year when I started this podcast with you, Miguel, I thought that was going to be a big headline in 2019. That 165 was going to start we're going to start seeing the development of that. We're going to start seeing catch weights to that division. We're going to start seeing people flighting from divisions to go into it. Then you'll end up having some big matchup made that would create it. I was wrong so far. I still think that's coming in the future, but at least not in the foreseeable future at the moment. Lee's going to try to go back down to lightweight, which I think that's going to be hard because he's a big man. I mean, he's struggling to make that weight. And then he gets thrown in there with Gillespie. Do you see this as bad management practice? Whoever's managing Lee, do you think that this is a step in the wrong direction for Kevin Lee, being 1-3 in his last 4? Or do you see this as being a huge step up in competition for Gregor Gillespie, who's really untested against serious prospects and talent? And we're going to have a Kevin Lee who's been in there with a lot of good guys, just made a great training transition where he's with Rory MacDonald, George St. Pierre, and Faraz Zahabi and others. This is a good fight to me. I don't know. I will say this. I'm kind of pulling for Kevin Lee. I like Kevin Lee. I want to see him bounce back from this down stretch in his career. What do you think? I mean, he's still young. What's your thoughts on this? I threw a lot out there, but this fight to me is one of the more interesting on the card.
I don't know how I cried malpractice for Lee. The thing about Lee is, he's proven himself with, Ferguson, Dos Anjos, the level of competition he's had. I think he's proven that, he's a guy who you can put in there with anybody, right? And, Gillespie, for all the hype and stuff like that, he still has a lot of questions.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? that's what we're going to have answered here, because there is a level above Gillespie. Lee's there in terms of athleticism and stuff like that. It's hard to bring wrestling to a match with Gillespie. You don't want to try to out wrestle that guy. That's what he does, and his groundwork and stuff like that. He's almost a little bit Askren like, So it's like, let's put him in some of the situations where, where he can answer some questions. Lee will answer the questions of how he'll deal with, a guy who's got experience now and is an exceptional athlete. Later on, you can try to put him in with, take your choice of submission guys or anything like that and see if his wrestling holds up against, a jiu-jitsu expert if you've got, the potential for that match or whatever. But Gillespie, yeah, I think Gillespie is a guy right now. If he wins here, we're going to see him at the top here relatively fast.
I agree. That I definitely agree with that statement, and I think that applies to this next fight that we're going to cover. And it's definitely another fighter that we have that's making a big step up in competition. Corey Anderson coming into this fight, ranked number 7 in the division, been in there with a lot of great talent. Just came off a win over Glover Teixeira not long ago. He's taken on probably the most hyped guy in the light heavyweight division right now, Johnny Walker, who's just been steamrolling guys. Back to Corey Anderson real quick. He has gotten wins in his last 3 fights over Patrick Cummins, Glover Teixeira, and Alir Latifi. And he's been in there. He's been in the round for a long guy. He was a very highly touted prospect coming up. Had some ups and downs, but has remained consistent, and he's got himself a number 7 ranking in the division. Walker coming in ranked number 11. Walker coming off a 36-second knockout over Misha Serkinov, a 15-second knockout by flying knee and spinning by hook kick and spinning back fist over Justin Ledet, and a 1 minute and 57-second knockout over Khalil Roundtree. So Johnny Walker, it's no surprise he's got such hype behind him. He's got the perfect name, got the perfect style. His last 3 fights, none of them have lasted more than 2 minutes. But he's going against a much more seasoned fighter with really good grappling, strong guy. This is one of those, just like with Gillespie, maybe even more so with all the hype that's been on Walker, that we're gonna see if the hype is for real when it comes to this one. We're gonna see, where he stands. Dominic Reyes may have earned himself a title fight with John Jones. There's another young guy that gets really no attention, Alexander Rakic, in this division, who is very good. This division's got some talent, and you've talked a lot on this podcast so far, Miguel, about what's best for the promotion. Johnny Walker winning, I believe, would be the best for the promotion, especially if he does it emphatically again, because he's going to be looked at as a scary, scary prospect for this division. But Corey Anderson's a solid guy, man, and he's one of the more solid and more consistent guys at this division, I think. And I think he's getting better. What do you think about this one?
Yeah, with Walker, we know he's explosive, right? All the first-round finishes and stuff like that in the UFC, he hasn't really slowed down and stuff. So we're looking for him to get into a longer fight and see something else besides him. One of the things that it's like, we only have a small body of work with him with the UFC, right? So it's like, he's a free spirit. He's kind of a cool personality and stuff like that. But he did, mess his shoulder up, in one of his celebrations and stuff like that. And there's a fine line between being kind of crazy and being kind of crazy good. You know what I mean? So I think he's yet to prove all that. Let's see how he stands up to some adversity. Hopefully, Corey Anderson can take him, man. I agree with you. If he takes Corey Anderson out in short notice and has another highlight type of performance, that should scare a lot of people.
I agree, and I think that will make him a big star and a big name moving forward for this division if that were to happen. We have a middleweight bout between another young, talented guy and Edmund Shabazian with his big step up in competition against Brad Tavares. Brad Tavares went to a decision in his last fight back in June of 2018 against the aforementioned Israel Adesanya. Edmund Shabazian right now coming in 21 years old, 10-0 in MMA. a Dana White Contender Series standout that won in 40 seconds in his Dana White Contender Series bout and has since come in and won all 3 of his bouts, 2 of them by finish in the UFC. In the rankings of this division right now at middleweight, you got Shabazian coming in ranked number 13 at only 21 years old. Tavares ranked number 11. So you got Shabazian really getting a push. 21 years old, 3-0 in the sport, coming off the Contender Series undefeated. Now he's getting a push for Tavares. If he looks impressive again, you might have a very, 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 very young guy maybe starting to approach the top 10 in the division. What do you think?
That's exciting, you know. Tavares has been around the block a little bit, so it's a good test. And, you know, I'm okay with where it sits on the card. You know, it's a big card. They wanted to get it on there. It's not on the pay-per-view, so you get to watch it, you know, on ESPN or, you know, whichever of the apps or whatever. But, yeah, definitely well worth watching. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, I meant to put Shane Burgos on here. He's taking on Marquand Amirkhani. That's going to be a good fight. Shane Burgos, his lone loss has been a stoppage loss to Calvin Kattar, but he's ranked in the top 15. That's going to be a prelim bout, one to watch out for with Shane Burgos. He's a top 15 ranked featherweight, very impressive guy. I believe is coming off a win over Cub Swanson. The last fight I want to cover is Caitlin Chookagian taking on Jennifer Maia, and the reason I want to cover this is because of their positions in this ultra-thin women's flyweight division. You've got, obviously, Valentina Shevchenko dominating the division right now. The only other fighter in this division there's really been any significant amount of hype on is Macy Barber, but we've covered in deep detail about how she's only 21 years old, and we need to step back from that. When you look at this, you got Caitlin Chookagian coming in here buried deep in the prelims. I think she might even be on the early prelims. And she's the number 1 ranked current contender in this division right now. And Jennifer Maia is the ranked number 5. It shows how much they just really don't seem to care at all about this division right now because they know these contenders are just not really gaining a lot of attention right now. But Chookagian, 30 years old, she's coming off a win over Joanne Calderwood. Before that, she lost to Jessica Ai by a split decision. She got 3 wins before that, so she is 4-1 in her last 5. And she lost about to Liz Carmouche. She overall is 6-2 in her UFC tenure. Jennifer Maia, somebody I've been impressed with. She's 31 years old, 17-5. She's won her last 2 bouts over Roxanne Modafferi and Alexis Davis. Before that, she lost a decision to Liz Carmouche. So I wanted to end with this because I like when we do these, and when I'm looking through a card, I'm looking for ranked fighters. I'm looking for who do they have. Does this fight have somebody that's ranked in the top 15 of these divisions? You know, I didn't add the Arlovsky fight with the other hungry, you know, powerful contender that he's fighting. And I forgot to screenshot Burgos, who's ranked. But here you got 2 girls that are ranked in the top 5 of their flyweight division at 125 that Valentina Shevchenko is at the helm of. To me, that's just indication this division right now, man, they're not even really trying to push names right now which is awkward to me because what are they going to do with Valentina? She's so far ahead. I mean, are they really just going to try? This makes me more worried when I see stuff like this. When you got 2 of the top 5 girls getting no attention, just buried at the very bottom of a card, even if it's a big card. Probably the winner of this is probably going to get thrown in there with Shevchenko again if she's going to defend her title, or they're going to run it with Calderwood, who Chookagian already beat. It makes me even more worried that they're going to end up rushing somebody like Macy Barber. They're going to look for a personality who's got some attention going for her. They're going to push her because they're clearly not pushing the girls that are close to her in the rankings. So what's your thoughts on this? Because to me, this is kind of, I don't know, with these girls being ranked so high in a division and being just buried deep, I mean, what kind of signal does that send to you about what they think about potential contenders for Valentina Shevchenko?
Yeah, no, it's not a good sign. They're not developing the division well. You know, if you're either of these two girls, you know, you kind of got to be thinking, you know, where's the, you know, Ronda Rousey, Conor McGregor type of hype for our division. You know, we've got a trilingual champion and, you know, but then this is where, you know, and put it this way, these girls are also unlikely to win fighter of the night or fight of the night or anything like that. I mean, they would practically have to do something we've never seen before out of this world for them to get that type of recognition. They are on the ass end, unfortunately, in this weight class of the UFC. Dana doesn't see anymore. You know, he may be up in the luxury boots or in the box or something while these fights are going on. Can't possibly, you know, care about everybody, and this is where that starts to show and it starts to be felt by the fighters, I think.
I agree. I think a lot of it just has to do with just how dominant Valentina is, and you know, most likely, like I said, the winner of this is going to be the next one to be her victim. Appreciated this time, Miguel. You know, we've covered all the high notes from last weekend, and I think we've covered in depth this card this weekend. It's a massive card, one of the biggest of the year. Oh, notoriously, International Fight Week and the Madison Square Garden card in November are the biggest cards of the year for the UFC. They did not disappoint this weekend. There's a great card headlined by a great, great main event, and that we're all going to be anxiously anticipating. Tune into the CRP next time. Like and subscribe, and we will recap everything. We will cover it all. Talk to you next time. Good to see you, Miguel.
Yep, take it easy, Dev. Thank you for having me, and everybody will tune in after the fights, and maybe we'll try to get something done Saturday night right in the immediate afterglow. If not, check in on Sunday. We'll try to deliver a post-fight on this major battle here, and we'll see if Canelo and Kovalev turns into anything worth watching as well. Catch you guys later, and take it easy.
Talk to you next time.